So today we're going to be talking about one of the most disastrous launches of this year. It really is spectacular, but it's one that also needs to be taken in a little bit of context. So let's do that. The Embracer Group have sold Saber Interactive for $247 million. That's just under half of what they paid 4 years ago. That being said, the deal may go up to $500 million for reasons we'll talk about fairly shortly. Now, this could be enough to get them out of the big financial mess that they've had, which of course has been responsible for many projects being killed, some studios being fully shut down, and loads of layoffs. Now, one of the assets they're retaining is Aspyr, and Aspyr are pretty notable because they developed the big game we're talking about today, the Battlefront Collection, a game that has basically had one of the worst launches of this year, like easily. It may even be the worst launch of this year. I mean, some of the facts are honestly just completely insane when we actually get into the server availability on launch. But anyway, that put the Steam scores for the game down, well, way down into like the 20s, lots of networking problems, bunch of other issues. Pretty rough. And I suppose regardless of how much talent and IP Embracer have tried to retain here, ultimately they clearly did not give the developers the time and the support to put out a great release, and ultimately, well, that has blown back on fans. Pretty rough situation, but I can tell you what won't blow back on you. It's today's sponsor. Our friends at Boot.dev, they're going to teach you back-end web development, which is an amazing skill, in this case with Python and Go, and doing it the smart way by making it fun. You see, they're an online self-paced platform 100% designed to get you writing lots of code, and not just any code. You'll be working through role-playing game-inspired problems, and like Boot.dev itself is an RPG. It's got quests, levels, XP, achievements, and you can get 25% off your first purchase by using my link and code. They have an incredible, very complete learning path for the field that is focused on the stuff we actually like. Role-playing game stuff is woven through their courses, like developing and deploying a Pokédex, learning object-oriented programming through RPG combat examples, that sort of thing. It's an approach to learning that's like actually trying to leverage things that we enjoy to help these concepts click. They're shipping new content all the time, and what really matters as well is what's around it, be it their Discord community, their like boots, their like little bots to actually help you learn. It is crazy because it doesn't just give you the answer, it's really good at actually walking you through the steps to come up with a solution yourself. It's just a really well put together platform, which makes sense. It's made by people who like the sort of things that we like and who are experienced in the actual, field of back-end development. Now, you can check them out today at boot.dev/Bellular News. That code gets you 25% off your first purchase, and that is backed by a no questions asked 30-day money-back guarantee. They've even got free demos for all their courses. Pretty sweet. So thanks, Boot. Let's roll. All right, thanks for helping me pay the bills. So let's talk about the port. The Battlefront Classic Collection is out. This is a combined port of the original Battlefront 1 and 2, games that to me are absolutely beloved from my childhood. I mean, we had some of the most fun, come on, just those big games on Hoth, like, man, that was the stuff. Now, the only major changes that are going on here are that they've ensured that every platform can play at 64 players in both titles. Then also the Hero Assault mode is now going to be available on all of the ground maps, and they've made it so that all of the previously console exclusive additional content is present. So essentially this is not a remaster, it's not a remake, it's basically a collection of the classic games being made far easier to access for modern audiences. This is not something that was going to be changing up graphics massively or improving settings or anything like that. It wasn't going to be similar to, say, Aspyr's Knights of the Old Republic remasters. Now, one thing they were doing was some crossplay, which is really good, but it is limited to platforms. So rather than being cross-platform, it is cross-generation. So PS4 and PS5 can play with each other, but Xbox and PlayStation can't, which is certainly an unfortunate thing. Now, compared to the previous work that Aspyr have done, well, Battlefront is a multiplayer game, one that still holds up pretty well. So that means that it's actually something that could reasonably expect quite a lot of players on launch. And suffice to say, Aspyr really didn't expect that many players. I mean, even before you get to that, though, you have oddities like this game being a 50 gigabyte install. That's a bit confusing because it's two PlayStation 2 games stitched together. That's really weird. But the weirdest thing is there were 3 servers in each region on launch. This essentially meant that 192 players could play this game at the midnight launch. Like literally, this is a screenshot of the server browser, right? There are 3 servers. I do not know how this happened, but basically you had a capacity here of 192 people with about 9,000 people actually sitting on Steam trying to play it. Now, that's the peak players. Basically, Steam will count anyone being in the client as that. So I suppose people could be playing on the single player and that sort of thing. Absolutely. But it just goes to show that the demand here was actually pretty damn strong. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about how good this game is. And of course, because it's a game of the PS2 era, you can just play it. There's no grinding unlocks, there's none of that stuff, and it's $35. So if you wanted to say, grab a few of your friends, show them a game you really liked when you were younger, that's like got quite a lot of like scope and spectacle still, well, yeah, GG, you lost $35. Now, ultimately, I think this is for $35 a pretty damn good value. You're getting all of those maps, all of the different modes across both of the games. You can play the multiplayer. That's all really great, okay? But that's not really all the problems that happened. It gets worse. So essentially, the easiest way to put this would just be to say that there were loads of netcode issues experienced by players. Some things that were really weird, and then just oversights, right? Like as an example, the ticket counts hadn't been updated in some cases, meaning that matches are basically half as long as they're supposed to be, which, again, that seems like a basic thing. I mean, say if you're playing Battlefield on, on PC and you've got some crazy server with loads of players, but it's just a normal, say 32v32 ticket count, well, you'll have like a 5-minute match, an 8-minute match, right? So this is like, I mean, that's just a baffling thing. It's really confusing. Also, with how, assets have been upscaled and all of that, just some of the UI, UX, audio, there's just quite a lot of little issues, which is absolutely not ideal. Ultimately, I would say that this is just sloppy. It is sloppy in absolutely every way, it seems, even though the core games are of course great, and that's why it's sitting at a lovely 21% on Steam out of 1,222 reviews as of the time of us taking that screenshot. So this kind of sucks, but you know what? It just feels perfectly like the chaos of Embracer Group's like current situation just put into this game, right? I mean, there's no way the developers had enough time to actually do everything right here. I mean, if things like the amount of tickets in a match in a multiplayer game like this, if that is being overlooked, then clearly the team like behind this were just not given enough time to playtest things. I mean, that's one of the first things that would appear at a scale playtest. There was clearly no time for the adjustments, the tweaks, the polish that actually would have been needed here. And that rushed nature is still pretty clear, even looking at some of the people who had some pre-release experience of this. So here's Zach, who was writing a review for Kotaku, and he basically said, I think some people are acting like it's an unplayable train wreck. It's messy, there are some issues, but it can be improved with some patches. I think that is true. It is like literally playable if you're sort of sitting there in single player, but overall, it is messy. He's absolutely right. And he goes on to talk about some of the patches that were happening during that review period. When I first started playing, the option to select games was different, uglier, and the loading screen sounds in Star Wars Battlefront 1 were correctly pitched. After the update, some things improved. Reload got swapped to X instead of down in Battlefront 2, and the loading noises in Battlefront 1 broke. So yeah, that really does seem like a bit of a chaotic whack-a-mole situation. And to me, that just kind of says this is happening way, way too early. I think this was obviously rushed out. You think about what Embracer Group have been like recently, their entire process has been, we need money now. And yes, as much as the divestiture of Saber is bringing in money and will be reducing further costs, I mean, I still think that like the decision making behind this release will have been based on them basically needing money and kind of rushing. At least that's what my assumption would be. And of course, this is a rough enough time for Star Wars. Obviously, you've got, say, the likes of Electronic Arts. They did a really good job fixing up Battlefront 2 and then just didn't support it after they fixed it, which seemed like a completely insane thing. We've got the FPS over at Respawn Entertainment being cancelled, and just all of that stuff. So for this to also happen is just sad, And I really think this could have done better if we weren't dealing with with bugs like this. This is a game that, number one, has still like sold pretty well for what it is, even with all of these problems. Like, just look at what those peak players were like in day one. So that in itself is a victory. But beyond that, it's multiplayer. It's $35. It's just a simple, good game. Like, that actually does tick a lot of the boxes that have driven other major successes this year. So maybe if they didn't, half-arse it, then things would have been better. Not that I think the devs half-arsed it, but, what choice did they have? Now, let's get into the rest of today's news then, which is the deal being done with Saber leaving Embracer. So, Saber were basically a really, really big group of like publishers and studios, and Embracer purchased them for $525 million, and now they're selling a big chunk of it off for $247 million. Now, the buyer here is Beacon Interactive, and they're controlled by Matthew Karch, who actually was the co-founder of Saber Interactive and was the ex-interim chief operations officer of Embracer Group from last year. So basically, they're kind of selling it to one of their own people in a way. Now, Embracer Group themselves are trying to position this as a big win for both them and Saber. And they're basically saying that they're not losing anything that they desperately have wanted. So here's what Embracer Group are going to be keeping here. 34 big things, 4A games, Aspyr, Beamdog, Demiurge, Shiver, Snapshot, Tripwire, Tuxedo Labs, and Zen Studios, totaling 14 games in development, and they value that at about $50 million. We then got some more info that was captured from a conference call and then shared with Video Games Chronicle, just detailing like a little bit more. So basically, Saber gets to take anything that's got Saber in the name: Digic, Fractured Byte, Madhead Games, New World Interactive, Nimble Giant, Sandbox Strategy, Slipgate, Ironworks, and 3D Realms. And they also get all of the intellectual property or contractor relationships that were attached to those studios, and that's a total of 38 projects, which really is quite a lot. Now, here's where it gets interesting. There are additional options around whether Saber want to buy Zen Interactive, which is the pinball people, or 4A Games. That, of course, is, Metro, right? Like Metro Exodus. The Metro games obviously are, well, they're completely awesome. I highly recommend you check them out. But anyway, they've got the option to purchase those, and if they do, it would increase the price to around $500 million for the entire transaction. Now, the implication here is that while Embracer are seeing both Zen and 4A as being like valuable things that they could want to keep, they also would be willing to sell if the deal was good enough. And that's rather reinforced by the fact that Plaion would retain publishing rights for Metro. So that's where things were left. But then it got interesting because somebody shared some documents with Jason Schreier. Jason Schreier then shared that stuff. And it seems that the new CEO of Saber, who of course is Matthew Karch, he is talking as if they do actually have 4A and Zen. However, Embracer's messaging has still suggested that they may retain the two studios, so it really is quite weird. I mean, if Embracer are letting go of Metro, maybe that's essentially just saying like, yeah, we're willing to let go of Metro only for a high price, and maybe they'd be willing to just get that money right now, because even though they would like Metro, perhaps they feel that the future of Metro in terms of game releases is just, too far in the future for their current financial needs. But overall, what's happened here is the Embracer Group are keeping a lot of the bigger names, right? They've got Teardown still, they've got Killing Floor still in the company, and then as for the wider implications, they're trying to sell this to their investors really in sort of 2 to 3 ways. Number one, they're saying they're fully divested from Russian entities. Obviously, given events in the world, that's something that they would like. Of course, there could be like sanctions, how you legally comply with all of that stuff. It's probably a real nightmare for them, so that's one thing. Number two, they say this saves them a hell of a lot of money. Their debt is now reduced by 2.1 billion Swedish krona. That's about $200 million, and they say this means that their restructuring targets for the fiscal year will now be met. Of course, given times and dates. That's very interesting timing. And they say that going forward, they'll be able to make more money per game because from their perspective, they've gotten rid of the sort of less certain things, but they've been able to keep what they see as being the more guaranteed hits. So I suppose in theory, this could mean the end to all of the bullshit regarding Embracer Group, right? Of course, it sucks that so many studios had to be screwed over for the last year, that so many games got cancelled, like all of that BS. It sucks that that had to happen. And of course, the other side here is we don't know all of the details yet for Gearbox, so there could be a little bit more there. Who knows? So I suppose those bad times are over. It is kind of weird though, because the guy that they're selling Saber to is one of the co-founders of Saber who used to be their COO. So I've got to imagine he just, well, you know, found some private equity or something, I don't know, to, you know, to be able to fund this entire thing. But yeah, given that Embracer owns so many studios, I mean, there was the point where they were far larger than Ubisoft, like in terms of headcount and stuff like that. So it's a pretty damn crazy situation, honestly, but it's one that does appear to be over. I suppose this does mean if you are a developer at any of the Embracer-owned companies, maybe this is a good thing for you. Maybe it means that the bad times will kind of be over. So ultimately, that's where we're at. I suppose it's funny that right as it seems a chapter may be closing for Embracer Group, they've had this game release that basically almost feels like a sort of a thematic match to all of their own bullshit. And of course, with Aspyr Media, what the hell's been going on there? You've had, I mean, all of the drama about the Star Wars stuff, you know, sort of being handed over to another team. So you kind of wonder, like, well, was that just development hell internally? What's been going on? Does that have an impact with this? And then I suppose the other side is, come on, this is Battlefront 1 and 2. What would a higher budget version of this collection look like? Because the funny thing is, you could just kind of go and buy the version of it that isn't $35, right? I mean, man, yeah, it's just weird. The industry's weird, but basically, there you go. This could have been a really good release, and it could have been universally positive news, but it isn't, clearly because the developers were not allowed to fully develop the game and it was released early. Something I think we're all pretty damn sick of. Anyway, that's it for me. I'll see you next time.